Welcome everybody, and Mr Fairhurst in particular. This is another of our evidence sessions on the Justice and Home Affairs Select Committee's inquiry into the governance of prisons, and we're delighted to have with us from the POA Mr Mark Fairhurst. Mr Fairhurst, could you just give us a brief background to yourself and then we'll get underway?
Yeah, sure. So I joined the prison service as a prison officer in 1992. I was posted to HMP Frankland in County Durham. From there I specialised as a PE officer, physical education. I moved to Lancaster Farms in 1996, which at the time was a young offenders institution. And then I managed to get back home at HMP Liverpool in 1999, where I've served since. I joined the POA National Executive Committee in 2015, served as Vice Chair, then National Chair in 2017, and I'm currently National Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, you will have been concerned, as everybody has been, about some of the recent reports about problems going on in our prison estate. We've heard only today about drones delivering drugs and weapons, but there's also been quite a number of stories about prison officers who have behaved inappropriately in a variety of ways. And I just wonder if you want to just comment on that and reflect on recent media coverage.
Yes, so it always surprises me when the media get excited, particularly with today's breaking story about drones. We've been telling our employer for at least the last 5 years that drones are a major security risk and will destabilise our prisons, and they need to invest in technology to block the drones from delivering to prison cell windows. We consistently get ignored. It falls on deaf ears. It seems to be, if it costs money, it won't happen. We know that there's technology out there to block drone signals. If you look at a prison in Guernsey, they have what could call a sky wall, where a drone approaches the prison wall and it's diverted, it returns to sender. Why can't we invest in our prisons in such technology to prevent drone deliveries? Because it's only a matter of time, and I'll state it publicly, before a firearm makes its way into a prison. We know there are drones out there that have a capability to lift a 75 kilogram load. That's somebody off the exercise yard. So it's only a matter of time. It's only by the skin of our teeth. My members haven't faced a real threat to life because of drone deliveries. So we want urgent action taken to rid the threat of drones. And reference staff corruption. There's always been staff corruption. I'd be naive if I sat here and say that there wasn't, but we're seeing more staff corruption. It's being highlighted more, I think, because we're getting better at catching staff who are corrupt. But this goes back to the entire recruitment and vetting procedures. The recruitment procedure is simply not fit for purpose. How can you recruit people into such an important role without a face-to-face interview? Everything is done remotely via Zoom. I've witnessed the recruitment procedure. It's not good enough. We want it back face-to-face.
Well, can I just interrupt you just for a second, because we're very keen to hear more about that, so we'll come on to that in a few minutes. But more generally about the corruption among staff.
Yes, so is it any surprise that staff are getting corrupted if they only adhere to 6 weeks training? 6 weeks training at training college, then you're a fully qualified prison officer. With very little support on the landings to nurture you, because we've got a severe lack of experienced staff. We don't get enough training on how you get conditioned by prisoners. Don't forget, you've got very inexperienced staff now dealing with very experienced prisoners. The wages are too low, so that's another restriction on the type of people we can recruit. And unfortunately, when you catch corrupt staff, there's always a massive headline that the press are all over, and they forget about the good work and the good people who are in the service, who are not corrupt. We don't want corrupt staff in the service, but the vetting's got to get better. When I joined in 1992, if you had a family member who had a sniff of a criminal record, you got nowhere near the job. We know we're getting people now, because of the lack of vetting, and it's not robust enough, who have been halfway through their training course and then it's been discovered that they've got a criminal record and they've after been dismissed. We know people are joining the job, although we haven't got the evidence at the moment. They're getting recruited by criminal gangs because they've got a clean record, specifically to traffic into prisons. We're simply not robust enough with vetting procedures. We should have the same stringent conditions and vetting as the police, because that's the type of role we're in. But we haven't got enough people in the vetting in HQ to go through everybody's social media posts. You can pick up a lot. So the only people who get social media vetting are those who are going to work in a high security estate or with young offenders under the age of 18. We want severe and stringent vetting for everybody who joins this role. And if it takes a matter of months to do that, then let's get it right. Let's start recruiting people who've been thoroughly vetted.
In terms of, I mean, you've referred to recruitment concerns, about vetting concerns, but you've also talked about the sort of lack of training generally. But is there currently any change to the amount of support staff once in post are getting in the light of the problems that come from overcrowding, increased violence and so on?
Well, there is in theory. If you speak to HMPPS directors, they'll tell you about the massive support we've got in place for staff, but in reality there's virtually nothing. So for example, you get recruited, you do your 6 weeks training, you go back, you're supposed to do an induction, you're supposed to get mentored by experienced staff, and the employer will mention we've got buddies, we've got new colleague mentors, we've got standards coaching team. That doesn't make a blind bit of difference. If it made any difference, why are 50% of new recruits leaving within 2 years of joining the service? 34% leave within the first 12 months. Just think about the cost to the taxpayer that is. Because there's virtually no support. I visit prisons regularly. I remember walking onto a wing and there was 3 staff there. One had 9 months in the job, one had 6 months in the job, and one was a second week live after training. And I asked where the management were. They didn't know who the managers were. The management are invisible because we've got custodial managers who've got 2 greater spans of control, looking after 26, 30 staff, are at meetings all day. They need to be on the wings leading by example, but we've got very, very inexperienced managers. And by the way, when you get promoted, you don't get any training. You can be a prison officer today, a custodial manager next Monday. You don't get any training. There's no development. It's a complete mess.
Thank you very much indeed. Lord Dobbs.
Yes, you mentioned in passing a question of young offenders. Could I ask you this? What are the challenges associated with housing young adult offenders or youth offenders on the adult estate?
It's really not a good idea because it destabilises the prison. You could have a settled prison and then all of a sudden you get an influx of 18 to 21-year-olds who are mixed with more experienced prisoners and they just disrupt things. So we used to have young offenders institutions who dealt with 16 to 21-year-olds, work perfectly, and now we're going to integrate them into the adult estate, which unsettles the prison because they're not mature enough. They're prone to violence against staff, violence against prisoners. So it does destabilise prisons quite a lot.
And has that happened because of the pressure on prison places generally?
I think so. I think there's a desire to house 18 to 21-year-olds in the adult estate, whereas in the past they've always been housed in young offender institutions, but there's not enough young offender institutions to house the demand for 16 to 21-year-olds.
Thank you. Lord Henley.
I note what you've said just now about problems with recruitment, and you touched on this in the written evidence that you kindly submitted to us. There obviously is quite a serious problem with recruitment, and there's also quite a serious problem with retention. Again, you touched on this, but the figures I was giving was the number of those resigning under 3 years' service was, I'm not sure I've got it here, but anyway, you will know, it's fairly bad.
Yeah, so on average it's hovering around 13%. Resignations from the service, but when you look at recruits, it's not their fault. Okay, you come into the service as a new recruit and it's not your fault that you only get 6 weeks training. It's not your fault that that training doesn't prepare you for the reality of life on the landings. It's not your fault that you haven't got support services in place to nurture you through those early months because there's a very severe lack of experienced staff to nurture you. It's not their fault. They don't have the same opportunities, the same experience and the same training that I did. But when you look at the people we're recruiting, so you can join the service age 18, you've got 18-year-old kids looking after 18-year-old prisoners in young offender institutions. That's not a good mix. We've now recruited from overseas, which is not a problem, but I'm hearing some horror stories. So we're recruiting from overseas, and you're getting recruits from overseas, we've heard, turning up at the gate with suitcases and family in tow, asking, where's my accommodation? Well, we don't supply accommodation. We've got examples of overseas recruits sleeping in the cars because they've got no accommodation. And apparently there's been a bunch of overseas recruits who, because they've got no accommodation, there's a wooded area opposite the prison where they are working at, and they've set up camp there. We recruited, I got an example of this last week, we recruited a person before Christmas who got sent back to their establishment from the training college because they weren't capable of locking or unlocking cell doors. They were incapable of controlling restraint training, and they were incapable of conducting a rub-down search, so they got sent back. That governor has had to dismiss that member of staff because he discovered that that member of staff had been recruited and has cerebral palsy. We are setting people up to fail. Where is the stringent standards and vetting procedures to prevent that? We're recruiting people who've got mental health conditions, and we're making them sicker. We're exposing them to more trauma, which makes them more ill than they've ever been, and they're leaving the service. That's not the recruit's fault. It's the system's fault. It needs to change.
We need to improve the recruitment process, and presumably we need to make sure that we retain the people once they are properly recruited. Are there enough decent opportunities for career progression and that sort of thing, again, that encourage people to stay on rather than leave after?
Not really. So if you wanted to transfer to another civil service department, you've got the option there, but you have to go through their recruitment process. Within the job, most people now who are promoted are temporarily promoted, and most of those people on temporary promotion have got very little experience. We've got examples of some people getting promoted after only 14 months in the job. The prison service is rife with temporary promotions, and the likes of experienced staff like myself, it's not really worth taking a promotion because the money's not good enough. Why should I, accept a promotion for 2,000 or 3,000 more than what I'm getting when I can work overtime and make my wages up that way? The responsibility isn't worth the risk, because don't forget, if I'm a custodial manager, I'll be responsible for anything between 20 and 30 staff. I'll be responsible for every incident in the jail. If I'm on nights, I'm looking after the jail on my own. That's a massive responsibility for what, an extra £2,000-3,000 a year. It's not worth it, and that's why you're getting young and experienced staff getting temporary promoted, because they're the only ones who want it. And there's no training whatsoever. There is no staff development whatsoever. You do not get any training to be a manager in the prison service. At every band, there's absolutely no support at all.
You did say earlier, though, that the government or the department would respond and say there is massive support, and you listed a number of things that they're doing. I mean, I'm still in slight difficulty between these two.
So HMPPS will sit in front of you and say, well, we have occupational health services, we have counselling services, we have trim trauma teams, we have staff support teams, all run by prison officers, by the way, volunteers. We also have staff development programs, so we have an Enable program, we have management qualifications you can go to. It's all rubbish. It's all rubbish. You ask any custodial manager who's just been promoted what training you've had, and they'll tell you, none. None.
Baroness Pritchard.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Fairhurst. You are treated as kind of part of the civil service structure. What are the advantages and disadvantages of being part of the civil service?
We don't mind being part of the civil service because we're happy to serve king and country. And we've got good terms and conditions, and we've got a decent pension. So we're happy with that. What we're not happy with is being part of the MOJ. HMPPS, it doesn't work. His Majesty's Prison Service, we need to be a separate entity. We need to be a standalone service like we were back in the 90s when we were under the Home Office. We don't need the MOJ interfering, because when you look at the MOJ, well, for one, they can't get nothing right. And for two, they're full of bureaucrats and non-operational staff. We've got non-operational staff with no experience of prisons writing prison policy and telling us how we can do our job. It doesn't work. They're the Ministry of Justice. We are a law enforcement agency. We need to stand alone on our own 2 feet with our own budget without restrictions from the MOJ. Similar to probation, probation need to be a separate entity so they can be successful again. They need to be under local governments. Leave the MOJ to service justice via the courts. Leave the prison service to enforce the law in our prisons as a separate entity.
And do you think the prison officers have enough autonomy within the current management structure?
I think governors are very restricted when it comes to autonomy. I think if you wanted to give governors more autonomy, you would give them the right to interview new recruits so they could see for themselves who they're getting through the door. They don't know who they're getting through the door until they turn up after training. What other occupation doesn't interview people face to face? And I think they need more power over how they spend their budgets because they're restricted by the procurement system. So if they want a simple repair done or some new initiative undertaken, why can't they just go to the builder down the road, get a quote, give them money, get the work done? They have to go through a lengthy process through approved procurement systems and approved providers who overcharge them ridiculously, and it takes an age. So if you were going to give them 2 bits of autonomy, I think they'd welcome those 2 bits.
And what about working between the operational and non-operational staff? Do you work cohesively together? Is there enough training given to both parties?
Well, I don't know what training civilian staff get, but when it comes to the service, they should be a separate entity to us when it comes to pay. They are part of our pay review body. Why? They've got the right to strike. We don't. That's our compensatory measure. So when we're asking for a pay rise, it includes non-operational staff as well. And there's a bit of conflict because we get an unsocial hours allowance because we work bank holidays, weekends, nights. They don't. So there's a bit of conflict there because we get more money and they see operational staff as being more protected than them. But I will say without civilian support, without the non-op staff in prisons, we couldn't run the service. And there's not enough of them. And I know they're overworked and underpaid. And they struggle to recruit.
Would you like the right to strike?
Of course it would, but the Labour government have already told us, despite in opposition otherwise, that they're not going to give us the right to strike back. And that ties our hands, doesn't it? Because we've got no human rights at work, got no basic trade union rights. Why? They restored the right to strike in 2015 in Scotland, and the sky hasn't fallen in there. In fact, industrial relations have improved. So I haven't even got the right to tell my members to work to rule, to refuse to work overtime, or to stop volunteering for tasks for which you receive no monetary benefit. I haven't even got the right to do that. So we've got no rights. Doesn't stop us, and it won't stop me in the future doing the right thing by my members to protect their health and safety if people don't listen and act. But why would you not give us our right to strike back? Ridiculous.
Thank you.
Lord Bark.
Morning, Mr. Fairhurst. Just want to ask you about the appraisal system. You might say, what appraisal system?
I was about to say, what appraisal system?
I thought I'd get in first if I could on that, because we know that it was suspended during COVID once, not just once, but twice during that period. And speaking for myself, I don't know about the committee, I think we're not quite sure what the appraisal system is at the moment and how it works. I wonder if you can help us, and what kind of appraisal system would you like to see?
So the appraisal system worked perfectly well when it was suspended. It worked great then, because it actually doesn't work. I don't even know what it's called. I think it's called performance monitoring or performance management. I couldn't tell you what it was called now. So it's supposed to work in this way. So I'm a line manager, I'm a custodial manager, and I'm supposed to sit down with my hierarchy every 8 weeks and have a meaningful conversation. How are you getting on? Do you need any development? Are you hitting the targets that are set? What can I do for you? And that's because we've aligned policies with the good old Ministry of Justice, who sit in an air-conditioned office down the road with comfortable staff facilities, who are line managing about 6 staff and can sit down with them every 8 weeks and go through performance monitoring. Our line managers have between 20 and 30 staff to look after. There are no staff facilities in prisons. A staff office is a converted cell. So when you're sitting down with someone, trying to appraise them, you've got the phone going off, you've got people in and out of the office, you've got alarm bells going off, you've got incidents to deal with. It's an impossible task. It does not work. What would I like to see? Well, for example, if you've temporarily promoted someone for a period of 12 months, that tells me that they're capable of doing the job. So why not just permanently promote them? Because they can do the job. Because if they couldn't do the job, they wouldn't be doing it for 12 months or more. So why do we need to sit interviews and assessments? Let's just give them the job if they're capable of doing it. When it comes to staff performance, I've got 33 years in the job. Why do I need a line manager to sit down with me and say, how's it going, what do you need? If I need anything, I'll ask them. It needs to focus more on the people who are new to the service. For the first 4 years of your service, you need that nurturing, you need that help in order for you to develop yourself. So why don't we just apply it to people who need it? Because the experienced ones amongst us, if we need help, we'll ask for it. If we need anything, we'll ask for it. If we want to go on a development course, we'll ask for it. The new kids on the block, they're the ones who need all the support. So instead of saying to someone, policy says you must sit down with the 26 staff you're line managing every 8 weeks, why don't we change it to say, right, you've got 4 new recruits on your wing, look after them and have as many conversations as you can throughout the year with them to support them, and do that for the next 3 or 4 years. That way we might retain more staff.
Right, Baroness Hughes.
Could I just follow up with a couple of questions? Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Fairhurst. Just on the appraisal system that you mentioned, the 8 weeks, can I just be clear, are you saying that is written down somewhere, what needs to be done in terms of implementing an appraisal system? It's just that it's not done. Is that the case?
Oh yeah, well, when we got consulted about a change in how we're going to appraise people, and we read in policy, you must have a meaningful conversation. That's how it's worded. A meaningful conversation every 8 weeks with the staff you line manage. And we said, well, that's all well and good if you're sitting in the office in the MOJ and you're only line managing 6 people. But when you're a custodial manager and you're line managing 26, you've got leave to take, you've got mandatory training, you're on nights, then you've got a week of rest days. What happens if you go sick? What happens if you're looking after the jail as Oscar 1, dealing with incident after incident? Where are you going to hold these meaningful conversations on a busy wing in a converted cell while everything's going off? We warned them not to do it, we warned them it wasn't practical, and we warned them it wouldn't work, and we've been proved right. But yet again, non-operational staff with no experience of prisons, who are writing prison service policy, who haven't got a clue what they're doing, ignored us.
So you're saying routinely it doesn't happen?
It doesn't happen. I don't know of a single prison where a
okay.
custodial manager sits down with their hierarchy every 8 weeks and has a meaningful conversation.
Thank you very much. And just secondly, quickly, are you saying that you can't see any point in any sort of appraisal system for experienced staff?
What is the point? It doesn't get used when you want promotion. You don't go through your appraisals from the last 20 years and say, oh yeah, you got exceeded there, you got a good there, oh, you were below standard there, what happened? You don't even come into the equation. So what's the point of them? If you're not going to use them, what's the point? What's the incentive? If I work well throughout the year and get an exceeded on my staff appraisal, do I get a bonus? Do I get an extra day's leave? Is it going to stand me in good stead for promotion? No, it's not going to stand me in good stead for promotion, because I've got a voice and I'll challenge poor decisions from people above me. What they want now is nodding dogs, people who won't offer an opinion, people who won't challenge poor decisions. They just want people who accede to their requests. They don't want experienced staff promoted.
Thank you, Chair.
Baroness Buscombe.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Fairhurst. I'm going to talk about the support that you as a union give prison officers through performance reviews, sickness reviews, grievances, and disciplinary investigations. Again, I think I'm going to feel I might know the answer already, but in general, do your members feel that these interactions, meetings, and processes are meaningful, such that they feel properly supported and understood by management?
No, not at all. And let me give you some examples and expand. And so when it comes to sickness, so I'll give you 2 examples. We had a female member of staff who attempted suicide. She was obviously absent from work. And when she returned to work, the governor decided to give her a sickness warning. Tell me how that's going to help her. Yeah. We had a female member of staff who was caring for her terminally ill partner, who requested from the governor of her establishment, I wish to reduce my working hours by 8 hours per week so I can have a day off per week on a temporary basis to take my terminally ill partner to hospital for treatment so I can support him, and that request was denied. We've got examples of people getting recruited because the advert says you can have flexible working, a work-life balance, reduced hours working, part-time working. They join the job and they're denied all of those things and then quickly leave. We've got examples of people who get approved for ill health retirement, and we're currently dealing with one case where the governor has decided that they're not going to approve the ill health retirement, despite the scheme medical advisor saying that they meet the criteria for it. Why are you playing God with people's lives? You know, why are you playing God with people's lives? It's ridiculous. We've got the ridiculous situation at Dartmoor, which is temporarily closed because of radon. Those staff at Dartmoor have been treated absolutely appallingly. Their lives have been turned upside down, and they've only got one of two prisons to go to in the vicinity. That's Exeter or Channings Wood. And we've got examples of people who've lost their appeal because they're settled and working at Channings Wood and being told they've got to work at Exeter, which is further away from their home and is costing the public purse an excessive amount of money. How is that value for the taxpayer? There is no empathy or sympathy whatsoever in the majority of cases I deal with from senior managers. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good senior managers out there, fantastic leaders who do a good job, but they're very few and far between. When it comes to the disciplinary process, they never ever adhere to timescales. They interpret policy to suit their narrative. We know of one prison group director, I'm not going to name the area, but we know that we will never ever win an appeal with this particular person, and we never have. Despite the mitigations and the evidence we provide, which proves that they should not have been dismissed, and this was an excessive award, we never ever win an appeal with this certain individual.
This is very disturbing, Mr. Fairhurst. But what are the key factors? Perhaps you could suggest some key factors that would encourage prison officers to have a good, solid relationship with management. What are the key things that would give your people the confidence that they are being supported?
Listen to the front line. The best prison governors are those with loads of experience who've worked their way through the ranks and have probably been POA members in the past, who sit down with their committees and listen to their committees and act upon the concerns that are raised instead of ignoring them and ploughing on regardless despite the risks. We had, I've got examples of a prison governor. The committee went into his office with a dispute and he read the dispute and said, oh no, I'll scrap that idea. Let's sit down and sort it out. Don't submit the dispute. That's great leadership, listening to the concerns. But what about the concerns of staff who were telling their senior management team, there's been a lot of violence on my wing this week. We know the wing is full of weapons and drugs and mobile phones. We want to lock down this wing and search every cell and get rid of those items. And the senior management team say, no, get them unlocked, provide a regime. That is not safe. That is people ignoring the concerns of frontline staff. A bit of sympathy, a bit of empathy, a bit of common sense. Listen to the troops on the front line and respect what they say and respect the concerns they raise. That's what we need.
Can I just ask very quickly, is there not a sort of an external oversight on this that could make a difference from the Inspector of Prisons, for example?
The Inspector of Prisons has got no power whatsoever. They're just recommendations. Look at the urgent notifications he's issued. Several jails have had 2 urgent notifications, and those jails with urgent notifications are supposed to get support from the centre. Well, look how that's worked out for them. There's nothing legally binding that forces anybody to change anything with any recommendation within the service. Maybe you should start holding people to account. What we find is, in the service, you reward failure. Those failed governors get promoted or moved sideways. We reward failure, and that's a sad thing to say, but it's true.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Lord Tope.
Sorry, I think it's me.
Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong. Sorry. Apologies. Baroness Hughes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a question in a minute, Mr Fairhurst, about the women's estate, but just before we finally leave the topic that Baroness Buscombe started with, I understand that last year you announced that the POA would no longer cooperate with the Chief Inspector of Prisons. Does that still stand?
It does, and that's because Mr Taylor wrote a scathing remark about staff at Wetherby who'd saved a young girl's life, and he wasn't happy with the actions they took. The actions they took was the right thing to do at the right time because of the circumstances they faced. He criticised them for that. I asked him to apologise because he admitted to me in private that they did the right thing. That's not what he wrote in public, and I asked him to apologise. He refused. So if he wants to apologise to my members at Wetherby for his scathing comments, which were bang out of order, I'll happily re-engage with him. As far as I'm concerned, he's not fit for purpose. He needs replaced, and we need an overhaul of the Chief Inspector of Prisons.
And you think that's a reasonable professional response from
yes,
an organisation?
Yes, I do. I'm here to back my members. I'm not having them criticised for saving a young girl's life by someone who's so out of touch that they don't know the reality of life in our prisons.
Okay. So just turning to the women's estate, are there any specific issues that your members report to you about different or additional challenges of working in the women's estate?
Yeah, the women's estate is full of people with very, very complex needs who are victims themselves of traumatic incidents against them. And what we asked in the past, I don't know if you're aware of the key worker scheme. The key worker scheme was brought in years ago to increase staffing levels, and every prison officer in the closed adult male estate has a caseload of 6 prisoners, so they'll look after 6 prisoners and help them through their sentence. We asked for key work to be introduced in the female estate, and they denied. They wouldn't listen to any of our arguments. And the reason we wanted that is because it probably worked better in the female estate than anywhere else because of such complex needs. Yeah. So what you've got now is you've got an influx of seriously mentally ill women prisoners who are getting looked after by prison officers who get zero training in mental health. Nothing at all. That's a drain on resources. You've got women there who should not be in a prison. They should be in a secure mental health institution in our communities. You've got a lot of female prisoners there who are serving relatively short sentences for relatively minor crimes. Not minor crimes if you're a victim of crime, but relatively minor crimes, shoplifting and stuff like that, who've been victims of domestic violence. Maybe we could do something better with female offenders. Why can't we just house the most serious offenders? Why do we have to house people who are in for petty crimes, who've been victims to self and suffered trauma all their lives? Why can't we do something better for them in our communities? You could even get prison officers going out into the communities and supervising them in secure settings and dealing with their trauma and dealing with their addictions. So the female estate, unfortunately, are seeing increasing levels of self-harm. And that's because we're dealing with more and more complex people without the resources and without the training.
So all the things that you've already said about the prison estate in general, about the lack of training, the lack of specific training, the lack of support and mentoring for officers, that also is the situation in the women's estate where these issues facing officers are so much more acute.
It is. It's a problem throughout the entire prison estate that we keep getting ignored when we highlight the concerns. Nothing seems to change. They just plough on regardless. And if you're a new member, I mean, Eastwood Park, if you read the inspector's report into Eastwood Park, how on earth you're supposed to run any type of regime at Eastwood Park with the complex women that you've got to look after is beyond me, because you're consistently fighting fires every day. And don't forget, when a prison officer deals with trauma, who deals with our trauma? What support do we get when we're cutting people down, when we're covering up cuts, when we're trying to resuscitate someone who's tried to take their life? Who looks after us? Who do we offload to? There's nobody. There's volunteers, prison officers volunteers to deal with trauma, trim trained. There's staff care teams. Who do they offload to when I offload to them? We've asked, year after year after year, for professional support on site in every prison. During the core day, Monday to Friday, I don't care who they are, a psychologist, a trained mental health nurse, a counsellor, I don't care who they are, employ someone. So when I've just dealt with a traumatic incident, I can go off the landing, I can offload in private to a professional. They can signpost me to additional support in my community if I need it. It might stop me going sick. It might stop me leaving the service. It might stop me getting PTSD, because more and more my members are getting diagnosed with PTSD because there's no support in place. And don't hit me with the argument, we can't afford it. Because long term, that would be cost effective. You'd probably save billions in staff sickness and getting rid of people on capability payments. So if everything comes down to cost, we'll get nowhere. It's time to invest in our service. It's time to invest in the people who are your biggest asset.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Fairhurst, if I just want to look back through one or two of the things you said in your written evidence, which we haven't picked up on. And one in particular struck me as the very clear view that you have that prison officers should only be appointed from the age of 21 upwards. I hear, of course, what you said earlier about 18-year-olds looking after 18-year-olds in young offender institutions. But given the shortages of staff that we currently have, the difficulty of recruitment, the difficulty of retention of staff, is that not totally unrealistic to be arguing for 21-year-olds?
Well, it always used to be the case. I couldn't join the job till I was 21. It always used to be the case that you had an age restriction, because you need those life skills and that life experience to deal with people who in some cases are very experienced criminals. And at a young age, not a full maturity, probably entering your first job or just got your university degree or whatever, you're very susceptible to conditioning. And we know the training isn't fit for purpose, and that's no fault of the people who recruit. There are some very good 18-year-old recruits, but I feel there needs to be a level of maturity and life experience to deal with people who inhabit our environment. And I think the sensible approach is to say you cannot join until you are 21. You can still join as an operational support grade. Maybe spend 3 years in an operational support grade so you're used to the environment, you get an idea of what the job is about, and maybe you think, well, that is right for me, or I don't really fancy it. But 21, you get more mature people, and you might get a better quality of recruit.
There are many other professions, though, that where you could argue the same case you're making, but where 18-year-olds very often are very capable of doing the job. And as you yourself have said, there are some 18-year-olds in the service who are doing a very good job. Is it not actually much more that we need to get both the recruitment procedure and the support and training procedures right, rather than look at the age?
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that, but until we put that right, we're stuck in a quandary where we're getting more and more younger staff, inexperienced in life and social skills, joining the job, getting exploited, getting traumatised and leaving within the first 2 years. And they're leaving in the first 2 years because the training's not fit for purpose, because a job they thought they could enjoy, they suddenly realise the reality of life on the landings. With a bit more maturity, that may not happen.
Well, all of that could or could not be true, but one of the things I'm just anxious to be clear about, and I think you've said it, if we can get the recruitment system improved, and obviously no longer using Zoom interviews, for example, and if we can get the support and the training procedures right, then you'd be less concerned about the 18-year-old, 21-year-old argument.
I don't think it's right that you should expect 18 to 21-year-olds to look after other 18, 19 and 20-year-olds in an authoritative figure, in a confined environment. So maybe if you just tweaked it a bit and said, well, if you're going into YCS estate, the young offender estate, you have to be a minimum of 21. But having 18-year-olds looking after other 18-year-olds, there's always going to be that conflict there and that challenge to your authority because you're at the same age.
And finally, if I can, I mean, we have a difficulty, I'm sure you'll appreciate as a committee, in coming forward with recommendations that are likely to be taken up by the current government, because that's what we all want to achieve. We're pretty confident that were we to go forward with a series of proposals that require a lot of money, being directed at the problem, we're not going to get those immediately accepted. So in among all of the things that you've been arguing both with us in the speech you made earlier in the middle of last year and so on, what are the quick wins that you would like a committee like ours to be recommending to government that you think are possible to achieve?
I think you could improve prison officer training. I think you could employ full-time staff at prison officer training colleges instead of sending them on a secondment for 2 or 3 years. I think you could recommend that you don't get promoted in the job until you've got a minimum of 4 years as a prison officer. That would definitely help. And I think you need to recommend that the culture at the very top changes so they have sympathy and empathy for staff and start to listen to the concerns that the front line are highlighting, instead of this attitude that I know best, you will do, and I don't care what your opinion is. We need to change that culture, because if it carries on the way it is, there'll be more and more resignations and more cases of PTSD, because people are being forced to work in an unsafe environment because the people in charge of our prisons refuse to listen.
Thank you very much indeed.
Could I just, I know, you know, what you've said has been pretty devastating. Is there anything that you've told us today which would surprise the MOJ?
Nothing at all. They know what's going on, but they'll never admit it in public. Listen, you get it warts and all from me. This is life on the landings. This is the reality of prison officer life. And whether people like it or not, now it's on record. They need to sort it out, and they need to start listening to what we're saying and acting. They very rarely discipline governors. They know what's going on. They know who the rogues are, but they never replace them. They know who they are. We had an example of a dozen staff whistleblowing, using the whistleblowing policy, all putting in the same complaints about a senior leader bullying, intimidating, targeting staff. In fact, they targeted one branch official to such an extent that he had to leave the job because he knew if he didn't, he would get sacked because they'd pin something on him. 12 staff all saying the same thing under the whistleblowing policy. What did the directors do? They give it to another director to investigate, and guess what? No case to answer. Surprise, surprise. That's the culture we're faced with. Everybody knows what's going on, but nobody wants to tackle it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fairhurst, we had to be, as you appreciated at the beginning, relatively brief, and we're enormously grateful for the evidence that you've given today. We're very grateful for the evidence that you've given in writing, and you've drawn our attention, and I'm grateful to it, to the evidence you've given to previous inquiries by committees both in this House and in the House of Commons. So thank you for all of that, but be assured we'll be going through that. If there is anything further following this that you felt you didn't have the opportunity to say, please feel free to write to us. But equally, I suspect we may come back to you with 1 or 2 specific questions, which I hope you won't mind responding to. But on behalf of the entire committee, thank you all very much indeed. And order, we're now suspending the session.